All right, in this lecture, we're going to talk about summarize spoken text and highlight incorrect summary. Now, these two parts of the test are both the listening in the listening section, and they both require similar kind of skills that we are going to look at them together. Okay, so I'll start sharing my screen. First, we're going to look at summarize spoken text. We're going to look at the intro. We'll do a warm-up activity. And then we are going to look at something called signpost vocabulary, okay? The vocabulary that kind of tells us relevant information. Then we're going to look at vocabulary that signals attitudes and opinions. Then we will look at redundant information. So when you're listening, you will have a lot of information that is not relevant for your summary. So you want to know, what is redundant information and what is relevant information. Then we will look at how we edit our summary. And then we're going to look at scoring, and then we'll do practice. Okay. Then we are going to start looking at highlight correct summary. I'll give you an introduction to that item type, and then we'll look at scoring and we'll do practice. Okay, sounds good? Let's get into this. So first things first, what is summarized spoken text? Well, you'll listen spoken text in terms of recording, and you will have to write between 50 to 70 words, and you will have to summarize the text that you heard. You will have to summarize the main points and the essential supporting points. Okay, now we already are getting very good at it because we have already practiced that in retail lecture, and we'll have to remember, we'll have to spend time. You will have 10 minutes to write your summary, so you'll have to check for your grammar, your spelling, and punctuation. Okay, this is very important editing skills. We did that in our write essay exercise, that editing part of the section is very, very important. So we're going to look at that as well. Now, the first things first, what is summarize spoken text? I'm going to give you an overview of summarize spoken text, and I'm also going to give you an overview of highlight incorrect summary. But these are some of, and you can see, the words that are underlined. Those words are the key words, and they tell us those are the signpost words that we're going to look at in the next screen as well. But these are the words that are the important key words that you should note down when you're listening. So I want you to listen to this text and look at the key information in terms of the words that are highlighted here, or that are underlined here. Okay. So today I'd like to give you some strategies for successfully completing the summarized spoken text item task in PT Academic. There are three main strategies: while listening strategies, while writing strategies, and after writing strategies. First, let's talk about while listening strategies. My first piece of advice is to try to pay attention to the content of the lecture. That is what the lecture is about. Secondly, take notes and try just to focus on key words. It's impossible to note everything, so just keep the keywords. You will miss important information if you try to write everything. After recording finishes, check your notes and get ready to write your summary. Now let's move on to some while writing strategies. Firstly, summarize the lecture in your own words. Very important, your own words. Always use an overview sentence to begin the summary. Make sure to include all the main ideas and only give a few supporting details. It is very important to use grammatical structures that you understand. Finally, or you feel comfortable with. Finally, let's briefly discuss some after writing strategies. I strongly suggest that you check the content of your summary. Does it contain all the key information? That's the question you should ask yourself. Check the word count of your summary. Does it contain between 50 to 70 words? If not, change the length and make it shorter or longer. But last but not least, check the grammar, spelling, and punctuation of your summary. Okay, so these are some of the strategies that I want you to focus on and if this was your summarized spoken text, these are some of the words that you will note down on your notepad before and after you start writing. Now let's talk about highlight correct summary. Today, I'd like to give you some strategies for successfully completing highlight correct summary item task in PT Academic. There are three main strategies: before listening strategies, while listening strategies, and after listening strategies. First, let's talk about before listening strategies. My first piece of advice is to watch the status in the audio status box. That is, be prepared and get ready to listen. Now let's move on to some while listening strategies. Firstly, concentrate on what you hear. Do not read the paragraphs at this point. So you will have the options, right? You don't want to be reading anything while you're listening. And we talked about this in retail lecture very in great depth. Secondly, take notes. Try to focus on keywords. Don't try to note every word, because you will miss key ideas if you try to write word for word. Okay, only the keywords, and we know how to understand what's redundant information and what is relevant information. We did that in previous lecture, in retail lecture, and we're going to touch on that here today as well. Finally, let's briefly discuss some after listening strategies. I strongly suggest that you first eliminate paragraphs that obviously contained incorrect information. So when you're looking at the options and you see the option with the incorrect information, you want to eliminate that, okay? We're going to use elimination strategies for highlight correct summary, okay? Then eliminate the paragraphs that contain information that is not mentioned in the recording, okay? So you want to eliminate those options as well, where you see the information that has not been mentioned in the recording. That is information that is simply not talked about. Also, you should try to eliminate paragraphs which contain details, but which omit the main or important points. You should try to eliminate those points as well, where you see the details, but it's omitting or it doesn't contain important points, okay? Last but not least, make a guess. Even if you're not sure of the correct paragraph, it's better to guess than to give no answer, okay? Because there is no negative marking and you might score mark if your guess is correct one, okay? So always guess the answer. Do not leave it blank. All right, let's talk about signpost vocabulary. What is signpost vocabulary? Signpost vocabulary is the vocabulary that signals you the key information, okay? Lecturers also use signal words to give their listeners signposts of lectures structure, to emphasize main ideas, and to distinguish main ideas from supporting details. What words are used by lecturer to help the listener understand the structure of the lecture? So for example, the first things he says here, or I said to you just now, is today I'd like to, right? This signals the lecture's main point, right? Today I'd like to, that is my main point for today, right? Three main strategies, signals. This is also signpost vocabulary. Three main strategies signals the lecture's three-part structure. So when I say that three main strategies, these are the keywords that you should be noting down: number one, number two, number three. First, let's talk about, and now let's move on to, and finally, so all of these things are kind of information that is going to, these are the signpost words. You don't want to note down the signpost words. You want to get ready when you listen to these signpost words. You should know that important information is going to be followed by that. Let's briefly discuss, this is also a good signpost words that introduces each main section in the lecture. What words are used by lecturer to help the listener note keywords? Sequencing words and phrases, such as my first piece of advice, firstly, secondly, and last but not least, help to order the key points. So these are all of these all of these words or phrases are telling you to sequence the key points. Okay, so it will help you to sequence your key points when you write your summary. Okay, in each section and words such as always, make sure to, it is also very important to signal emphasize. When I'm saying always, make sure I'm emphasizing on those points, and you want to note them down and you want to reflect that in your summary. Now let's look at an exercise, and I want you to pause the video here, and I want you to underline the signpost words in this lecture. What words are used by the lecturer to help the listener understand the structure of the lecture and note keywords? I want you to underline the signpost words that is going to help you to decide what keywords you should be noting down for your summary. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at the signpost words and underline them. Let's look at the response, the answer. So these are some of the, look at the underlines. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the underlined words in the following lecture. What job each underlined word or phrase is doing in the lecture. Work in groups, and if I would have a class with groups, we can work in groups, but this is an online course. You will be working on your own. You want to write down synonyms for these words. These synonyms can be phrases as well. You can use words, you can use phrases instead of these signpost words. So first of all, we have today, I'd like to, that's a signpost word. Main strategies, instead of main, you can write down the synonym. Obviously, the reason why we are learning how to write synonyms and phrases to replace them with is because you want to paraphrase your summary, right? So when you're writing your summary, you want to be paraphrasing your summary. So first, let's talk about my first piece of advice. How can we use synonyms here? These are all signpost words, right? That are giving us key information. Now let's move on to firstly, try to focus on. Finally, let's briefly discuss some. I strongly suggest that then that is also you should try to, but not last but not least. So pause the video here and then come back, replace these words with synonyms, and I'm going to share with you the answers when you come back. All right, let's look at some synonyms, suggested answers. So instead of I would like to give you, you can use I want to talk about, I want to tell you. These signpost words signal the lecture's aim, purpose, or the main topic, which is highlight incorrect summary, isn't it? Instead of I would like to give you, you can use important. There are 3 important key major strategies. Okay, these sign words signals important sequence points. Instead of first, let's talk about, I can say to begin, let's discuss. Okay, so I'm replacing, I'm paraphrasing the phrase that I used previously. My first advice is, instead of my first advice is, you could use, I'd like to start by saying that you need to watch the status in the audio. So these signpost words help to order key points and signal emphasis. Okay, instead of first let's talk about, I can say now let's I'd like to turn to some, right? And instead of my first piece of advice, I can use number 1. And then instead of right. So instead of firstly, I can use number 1, concentrate on what you hear, instead of do not read the paragraph. I can say remember not to read the paragraph. Instead of secondly, I can say after this, instead of try to focus on keywords, I can say give your attention to keywords, right? These words, see, these signpost words help to order key points and signal emphasis as well. Instead of finally, let's briefly discuss some, I can say lastly, or finally, lastly, right? So synonym, let's quickly talk about. Briefly discuss or quickly talk about, same thing. You're just paraphrasing. I strongly suggest that it is really important that, okay? Instead of then, we can use then is fine as well. In other words, that is, instead of that is, in other words, and instead of also, I'm using furthermore, instead of you should try to, aim to, and instead of last but not least, I can say finally, but importantly, okay? So these are some of the ways we can use synonyms, and all of these words are the signposts that help order key points and signal emphasis. Okay, let's just talk about vocabulary that signals attitude and opinion, okay? So when you hear all of these words, you should know that the speaker is trying to give his opinion about something and what type of opinion he has. Positive, neutral, negative. Is he certain about certain things? Is he uncertain about certain things? So for positive attitude or opinion, he might use words like magnificent, great, impressive, fortunately, thankfully. For negative opinion or negative attitude, he could use adverbs such as awful, poor, regrettable, unfortunately, and regrettably. For neutral, he could use arguably and possibly, right? And you can also use these adverbs in your summary as well, right? And you can use synonyms. Certain, if he's certain about something, undoubtedly, clearly, without doubt, a major problem, indisputable facts, clear evidence. Uncertain, you can use seem, may, appear, might, perhaps, suggest, indicate. All of these adverbs or all of these words help you to write if you hear that the speaker is uncertain about certain things. Okay, now I'm going to play a recording and I want you to fill in the gaps, okay? You will hear a short lecture. Below is the transcript of the lecture. Some words which help to convey the speaker's attitude and opinions have been omitted from the transcript. As you listen to the lecture, try to fill in the missing words. So let's listen and fill in the gaps first.
Most students at some point of their high school education will be faced with a choice of studying history or geography. For my part, I firmly believe they should both be compulsory. Given this is often not realistic, how do we best guide students in their choice? The guiding tenet should be what the student is interested in. Students' natural leanings seem so often these days to be overlooked. For goodness sake, let them do what they want to do, not what they think will lead them to future economic success or what their parents think they should study. If they aren't sure, talk to them about their strengths and interests. History will clearly involve more essay writing, which may be limiting for some students. Geography, on the other hand, calls for practical skills, field work, and a different style of writing. Encourage students to talk to older students about their experiences and if they were happy with the choices they made. Looking at the type of assessment tasks given for the various courses could also provide the uncertain student with a little more idea about what to expect.
Okay, I hope you had a chance to fill in the gaps. Obviously, we practice to fill in the gaps here as well. But what I'm trying to get to here is that firmly believe, this is a strong opinion, the guiding tenet, for goodness sake, right? If they aren't sure, talk to them and then encourage students. Now, let's look at some of the questions here. We've got 2 questions here. Discuss and answer these questions in groups, and obviously you're working on your own, so don't worry about groups here. Just look at these questions and answer these questions. Does the speaker have a strong or neutral opinion? And how do you know? How do you know that they have neutral or strong opinion? Okay. Second question. Would you say that speaker is giving strong advice or tentative suggestions? Give evidence from the transcription or transcript to support your answers. So pause the video here, write down your answers, and when you come back, I'm going to share some answers with you and we're going to reflect on it. All right, so let's look at these answers, right? So adverbs such as firmly indicate a strong opinion, a weaker or more neutral. So firmly indicates a strong opinion. So when we look at firmly, that means that the speaker's opinion is quite strong. A weaker or more neutral opinion would be signaled by adverbials such as generally, basically, or less, more, or more or less, or more or less. The adjective guiding also indicates a strong opinion and is often collocated with synonyms for tenets such as principle, belief, or ideal. Finally, the phrase "for goodness sake" indicates a strong feeling and suggests that the speaker is exasperated with arguments which might conflict with her own opinion. So these are some of the adverbs that will help us to know that this opinion, the speaker's opinion, is quite strong about this. Now, question number 2. Would you say that the speaker is giving strong advice or tentative suggestions? Give evidence from transcript to support your answer. The use of imperatives such as let them, imperative, these are imperatives, let them, talk to them, encourage them, indicate that the speaker is giving strong advice. Let them, right, with a direct way of speaking. So that's a strong advice. More tentative suggestions would be indicated by the use of modal phrases such as you might like, perhaps you could, or why not try to. These are tentative suggestions because you're not sure about it, you're not being direct about it, right? So that's how you would kind of know what's the attitude and the opinion of the speaker. And you want to reflect that in your summary. All right, now what we're going to do is that I'm going to read a script for you. I just want you to listen it. I don't want you to read it. I just want you to listen. And we are going to do an exercise where we are going to highlight an incorrect summary, a correct summary. And we're going to look at the redundant information and we're going to put brackets around it. So I want you to just listen, don't read anything. I'm going to read this transcript to you. You just note down keywords, key information, which will help you decide and which will help you highlight the correct summary. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. Travel challenges and offers life-changing experiences that broaden perceptions and knowledge. For me, traveling has become a lifelong quest to expand the taste memory bank to find different interpretations of what has already been learned and tasted, with the hope of discovering something new, combined with the constant challenge and desire to take risks and evolve. These experiences have translated directly into my work, intellectually, emotionally, and practically. I'll go anywhere where food is a celebration of everyday life, where conviviality and the pleasures of the table are cherished. And it is these places I rely on for constant and ongoing inspiration, like drawing breath. So many places, so many people, so little time, so many adventures to engage in, so much delicious food to taste, so many flavors to experiment with, so much to glean and learn. The more I see, the less I feel I know. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to look at these 4 summaries. We've got 4 summaries. We're going to highlight the correct summary. I want you to underline the signpost words. And I want you to put curly brackets around the information that is inaccurate information, incorrect information. And I want you to put square brackets around the information that is not mentioned in the transcript that you just heard. Okay. So pause the video here, do this exercise. When you come back, I'll share with you the answers. All right. So identifying redundant information in a summary, okay? Let's look at first summary. The speaker outlines the key drawbacks concerning travel. It's incorrect information because it's talking about the benefits of travel, not the drawbacks, right? These are lack of, and the underlined words are basically the signpost words, right? These are lack of experience, constant challenges, unforeseen risks, and experiences with unusual food. Many travelers also experience problems with translation and being misunderstood while living and working in foreign places. Inaccurate information, you must have gotten the curly brackets. For this speaker, travel is all about food. A good meal is like a cherished family celebration. So a good travel experience is like eating a delicious meal with familiar tastes and textures. The only problem about travel is finding yourself in unusual, strange, and often upsetting situations. It's wrong information, right? So you're gonna put curly brackets there. Number 3, for many people, there is not enough time to undertake all intellectual, emotional, and practical experiences that everyone should enjoy. One way to obtain this extra time is to avoid travel, not mentioned in the transcript. So you're gonna put a square bracket. The experiences gained from travel can be equally gained from a good meal with family and friends in the comfort of your own home. That is also not mentioned in the transcript. So that means that option is not going to be correct as well. Let's look at the last one. Does it summarize the transcript correctly? Let's look at number 4. The benefits of travel include the possibility of experiencing life-changing the benefits. So speaker is talking about the benefits, right? And the first sentence is all about that, right? It's giving you the main topic. The benefits of travel include the possibility of experiencing life-changing experiences. Travel is about incorporating these new experiences into our existing world view in order to evolve. One example of this is the cuisine of local cultures. Ultimately, the speaker thinks that the more he experiences, the less he feels he knows. Okay, so that summarizes it starts with the main topic, which is the benefits of travel. And then it talks about what the travel can do for a human, for an individual. And ultimately it talks about, the more he feels, the more he knows. So all of these things are talking about the travel experience. And this completely summarizes the transcript correctly. So that will be your correct option to choose. All right, now let's talk about editing summary. So obviously when you will write down a summary and you want to summarize not all points, right? So this is a summary. You want to pick the most important points. That's one thing that you should look for. You should look for, have I got the content right in my summary? It should be between 50 to 70 words. You have a limit. You can't be writing everything, okay? It's slightly different to retail lecture. Now, retail lecture, you want to include as many points as you can. Here, you want to include only the main points because you're writing a summary, not retelling the lecture, okay? Now, look at the incorrect things. Obviously, when you write a summary quickly, you want to edit your summary. And the errors that we have here, let's look at the first error here. The Disney CEO is respond to a question. We've got a verb form error here. So how would you change that? You would say is responding, okay? When you have auxiliary is, you need an ing form, so you'll change that in that case. To a question about the value of locally produced content in a global world. And there is no full stop because you see, he answer, it's starting with a capital letter. There is no full stop, that's the punctuation problem. So full stop is missing, you got to put a full stop there. He answer, you know that with he, she, it, we use the singular verb form, right? So we want to change that singular verb form to answers, right? He answers by pointing out that his product is well known and will continue to grow. However, he feels it is it. Wrong order, right? Wrong word order. So it should be it is, not is it. However, he feels it is, not is it. Okay. It's still important to have his staffs. Again, that spelling mistake. You should say staff. Staff is plural anyway. There is no word staffs. Okay. So you got to be careful with that. Working in a local situation and to use local creativity. Again, a spelling mistake, and you want to fix that as well. So you want to be looking for content, you should be looking for punctuation, you should be looking for grammar, you should be looking for word choice. Okay, all of these things you should be looking when you're doing the editing. Editing, again, is a very important tool If you don't spend time on editing, 2 to 3 minutes, you got to spend on your editing, at least 2 minutes, I would say. You'll have 10 minutes, write down your summary and edit it rigorously to make sure you're polishing your summary, okay? All right, let's look at the scoring. This item type is obviously judging your ability to comprehend, analyze, and combine information in from a lecture and summarize key points. Now, this is key. Key points, summarizing the key points, and you should know what the key points are, what the most important things are, and what is redundant information that you don't want to include in your summary. Also assessed on quality of your writing, okay? And quality of writing is obviously, it should be cohesive. It should start with a topic sentence, and then you should talk about supporting details in a cohesive way, and you should be using cohesive devices here as well, discourse markers. Now let's talk about content. Test your content. All key points of the lecture has been addressed without misrepresenting the purpose or topic. Misinterpretation or misrepresentation of the topic will score 0. So if the topic is about benefits of travel and you're writing the disadvantages of travel, you're going to score 0 because you're not talking about you're misrepresenting the topic, so you don't want to do that. And that's why it's super important that you listen very carefully. While you're listening, you should pay full attention and note down the key information and the topic. You don't want to be reading anything while you're listening. You don't want to be reading the options. You don't want to be looking around the room. You got to be very focused when you're listening and note down all the key information. In terms of form, you've got to have 50 to 70 words, right? You shouldn't write less than 40. You shouldn't write less than 50 words, but if you write less than 40 words or you write more than 100 words, you will score 0. Okay, so you got to be very, very careful. Your length should be between 50 to 70 words for you to be able to get really good marks. Grammar, correct sentence structure. If you're using complex structures or if you're using compound structures, simple structures, it should be correct sentence structure. Vocabulary, the word choice and usage, use appropriate synonyms. Don't try to repeat vocabulary. Try to use variety of vocabulary and try to use synonyms as well when you're paraphrasing the lecture, right? So you listen to the lecture, don't use all of the words from the lecture. You can use synonyms, and that's going to give you good marks for vocabulary. In terms of spelling, please use single spelling convention. We talked about this before. If you're using American convention, try to stick with American spelling convention. If you're using Australian or British spelling convention, you use the British all over your summary and your test, okay? Partial scoring applies, obviously, if you write a good summary, if you write a complete summary and you include all the main points, you get full marks. If you miss points and if you have gaps in different areas of your scoring areas, then you're going to lose some points. So partial scoring applies. In terms of the areas where you get points for listening, because it's a listening test as well. Writing, you get points for writing. In your communicative skills, you get points for listening and writing, and in your enabling skills, you get marks for grammar, spelling, and vocabulary. Okay, so now let's do our first activity. You're going to hear a lesson. It starts in 12 seconds, gives you 12 seconds to kind of read, the prompt. Doesn't give you much in the prompt. So just relax and get ready. Your pens should be ready to note down important information. And in 12 seconds, you start listening. I want you to pause the video here right after you listen the lecture. And I want you to write a good summary. And then we're going to I'm going to share with you the transcript and B1, B2, B3, B1, B2, and C1 responses and their explanation. Let's go.
Scientists are discovering that when you touch someone, you communicate very specific emotions such as sympathy, disgust, gratitude, or even love. The current issue of the scientific journal Emotion features a series of studies about touch. Reporter Michelle Trudeau touched base with the lead researcher.
Psychologist Matt Hertenstein from DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, decided to study touch while he was watching parents interacting with their babies, making faces and cooing sounds, squeezing, stroking, nuzzling them.
And
All of a sudden it struck me one day and I thought, I wonder if touch can communicate distinct emotions, much like the face and the voice.
Decades of research has been done on the face and the voice and the distinct emotions that they communicate, but touch had been relatively neglected by researchers until Hertenstein stepped in and began his experiments.
We invited 2 participants into the lab and we put a curtain up between those 2 people
so they couldn't see or hear each other. One participant, the sender, was told to try and communicate 12 different emotions, one by one, to the other participant, the receiver.
The receiver would put his or her arm underneath the curtain onto the sender's side.
The sender would then touch the receiver's forearm, trying to communicate the specific emotion, such as envy, fear, love, embarrassment, anger, gratitude, pride, disgust. The receiver had to then decide which emotion was being communicated.
All right, I want you to pause the video here, write a good summary between 50 to 70 words, come back and we're going to review the transcript and also the various different types of responses. All right, here we have the transcript. I hope you had a chance to look at your to write down a good summary. We're going to look at some summary that will give you some examples. Let's read the transcript first and see if you got the main points here. So scientists are discovering that when you touch someone, you communicate very specific emotions such as sympathy, disgust, gratitude, or even love. So the main topic is about touch, isn't it? The current issue of scientific journal Emotion features a series of studies about touch. Reporter Michelle Trudeau touched base with the lead researchers, Michelle Trudeau, psychologist Matt Hertenstein from DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, decided to study touch while he was watching parents interacting with their babies, making faces and cooing sounds, squeezing, stroking, nuzzling them. And all of a sudden, it struck me one day, and I thought, I wonder if touch can communicate distinct emotions, much like the face and the voice. Decades of research has been done on the face and the voice and the distinct emotions that they communicate. But touch has been relatively neglected by researchers until Hertenstein stepped in and began his experiments. We invited 2 participants into the lab and we put a curtain up between these 2 people, so they couldn't see or hear each other. One participant, the sender, was told to try and communicate 12 different emotions one by one to other participant, the receiver. The receiver would put his or her arm underneath the curtain on to the sender's side. The sender would then touch the receiver's forearm, trying to communicate the specific emotions such as envy, fear, love, embarrassment, anger, gratitude, pride, disgust. The receiver had to then decide which emotion was being communicated. So the sample summary and the good summary, it should be like this, right? And I'm going to give you a good example here as well. It is believed that touch can communicate wide range of emotions. I mean, you're not naming all the emotions. You don't want to name all the emotions. You can say wide range because you're summarizing, right? That's the first sentence. Now, touch has been ignored by researchers in the past and has not been focused on until recently. A person describes an experiment carried out into touch and emotion to prove that touch can communicate a range of specific feelings. Okay, so that's a good summary right there because you're summarizing all the key information. Let's look at B1 response. Scientists have researched that touch has more emotional signals to humans' feelings, even stronger than hear and see. For we see or hear people and we may not feel much. Scientists have done an experiment involving two. So obviously there are grammatical errors here, I can see. And we'll read the explanation soon. In 2 participants, one can see and hear each other while the other can only touch the other one. They found that through touch, people can feel more about humans' feelings, like envy, love, and etc. Now, while the response contains information related to the lecture, the test taker misrepresents the main point. So that's why you're going to lose your points when you misrepresent the main point, right? Leading the reader to believe the lecture is about an experiment which proved the importance of touch over sight and sound. This response demonstrates poor grammar control, verbs and nouns are improperly formed, and several prepositions are missing. The vocabulary is basic and imprecise, spelling is fine, the word count is 70 words. All right, we've got B2. Research shows on the role of touch in communicating emotion like gratitude, love, and anger. It can be observed through parents making face, cuddling their children. One experiment has been made with two participants, one the sender and the other the receiver of touch. They are separated by a curtain, and the sender is asked to touch the receiver to communicate 12 types of emotions like anger, love, disgusting. In this response, the explanation, let's read the explanation now. In this response, the main point has been discussed and supporting points are included. It demonstrates weak grammar control, which hinders understanding. Okay, so weak grammar control. Instead of using nouns, they're using the adjectives, which is, I mean, for example, in terms of disgusting. So you got to be careful, you know, what form of verb you got to be using. Okay, there are several spelling mistakes, and the word count is 70 words. Now let's look at C1 response. Touch has been neglected as an avenue of communicating distinct emotions relative to studies involving facial and vocal communication. So kind of making that distinction. The journal Emotion featured studies involving touch. One researcher was motivated to study after seeing how parents and babies use physical contact in addition to facial and vocal expressions to communicate with one another. In one study, the center was asked to communicate 12 distinct emotions, for example, fear and love. Now let's read the explanation. This response is an accurate and detailed summary of the main point and several supporting points discussed. The grammar follows standard conventions. The vocabulary used is appropriate for the context. There are few spelling errors. The word count is 68 words. So that's a good example of writing a good summary. Now what we are going to do is this time I'm going to read the transcript, and I want you to listen as you're listening to a lecture, all heads down. Do not look at the screen at the moment, just listen, and I'm going to read this transcript to you, and I want you to write a good summary out of that. Let's go. About 20 years ago, Ken Anger and Barry Johnson came up with 750 chemicals that could harm the brain during development. Nobody has since then dared to update that number. It's just a guess today. There has to be more than 1,000 if there was 750 20 years ago. But the problem is also that we have put too little emphasis in this type of research. For example, it has taken so far the OECD 10 years to devise a battery of tests that they could recommend for systematic testing of chemicals for development neurotoxicity. That panel, that battery, has not yet been completed and authorized by OECD, so it's taking way too long because it is complicated. But there is so much at stake. Children are just losing IQ points and losing their concentration span, memory or motor functions. But in the present world, where there's so much emphasis on knowledge and brain functions, this can also translate into dollars. The EPA has calculated that every time a child loses 1 IQ point because of chemical pollution, it costs society something like $8,000 or $10,000. All right, I want you to pause the video here, write down the summary, and then I'm going to share with you the transcript and the different types of responses. All right, I hope you had a chance to look at, to write down a good summary. Now let's look at the transcript, and I hope you got the topic and the main points from the summary. Let's read the transcript here. About 20 years ago, Ken and Barry Johnson came up with 750 chemicals that could harm the brain during development. Nobody had since then dared to update that number. It's just a guess today. There has to be more than 1,000 if there was 750 20 years ago. But the problem is also that we have put too little emphasis in this type of research. For example, it has taken so far the OECD 10 years to devise a battery of tests that they could recommend for systematic testing of chemicals for development neurotoxicity. That battery has not yet been completed and authorized by OECD, so it's taking way too long because it is complicated. But there is so much at stake. Children are just losing IQ points and losing their concentration span, memory or motor functions. But in the present world, where there's so much emphasis on knowledge and brain functions, this can also translate into dollars. The EPA has calculated that every time a child loses 1 IQ point because of chemical pollution, it costs society more like $8,000 or $10,000. All right, sample summary. I'm going to share with you a good sample summary here, and I hope you've written summary like that. About 20 years ago, it was estimated that there were 750 chemicals that can affect the developing human brain, and today there may be over 1,000. There is little emphasis on the possible damage caused by developing children from these chemicals. It has taken the OECD 10 years to develop an index to test for development neurotoxicity. Economically, each IQ point lost to chemical poisoning has an impact of $8,000 to $10,000. B1 response. The lecture mentions chemical tests for brain development. There are 2 levels of chemical tests. The first one is conducted by OECD, and on the systematic test chemical, they found that it takes a long time and too complicated for this test. The second is carried out by EPA, which tried to find out some chemical solution. Quite a lot of incorrect information here, as you can see. So let's look at the explanation. While the response contains several key words, it does not summarize the main issues described by the speaker. It demonstrates weak grammar control, which hinders understanding. The vocabulary used is appropriate for the context. There is 1 spelling mistake. The word count is 56 words. In terms of B2, about 20 years ago, scientists came up with 750 chemicals that could harm the brain. It might be more than that nowadays. Research on the harmful chemical is complicated and could take too long. Chemical pollution has various effects on children, for example, loss of concentration span, memory, and IQ points. Now, while the response includes the main points, it does. Other key information from the passage is omitted. This response demonstrates good control of grammar. The use of vocabulary is appropriate within the context, and there is no spelling mistakes, and the word count is 51 words. For me, to be honest, I'm happy with that summary, but it does score B2 because it's not including other main points, such as, OECD. Let's talk about C1. 20 years ago, the list of chemicals which affected brain development was numbered at 750. Today, this number has increased to about 1,000. There is insufficient research on the testing of such chemicals by OECD. These chemicals cause harmful effects like the loss of IQ. It should be lost, but anyway, IQ, concentration, memory, and motor functions. It is estimated that for every lost IQ point of a child, society stands to lose $8,000 to $10,000. Now, it includes quite a lot of key information, like these experiments by OECD testing, and it talks about the harmful effects and its effects on human brain. This response is accurate and detailed summary of the main point and several supporting points discussed in the lecture. The grammar follows standard English convention. I would say that there is some grammatical errors, but still doesn't hinder the understanding. The vocabulary used is appropriate for the context, and there is no spelling mistakes. The word count is 70 words. All right, let's look at highlight correct summary now. I'll give you a little bit of intro before we dive into it and do more practice. When you are listening the highlight correct summary and you're listening to the lecture, you want to take notes, and these notes are going to help you to match your content to the content that is presented to you in terms of options, okay? So you want to take notes, very important. You want to take notes, and when you're listening, you don't want to be reading paragraphs or options. They're too long, and you don't want to be reading anything while you're listening. Again, we talked about multitasking. You don't want to be multitasking because it's not effective, okay? Don't read options, focus on listening, okay? Match the option closest in your details to the things that you've noted down, and you will note down the key information like you did for summarized spoken text. Whatever is closest to your notes in terms of options, you want to select that one, okay? All right, let's look at this one, for example. You might have heard, and this is just an example, when you're listening to the recording, you will note down important keywords such as models of motivation, normal people, two models, main focus, homeostatic one, sorry. And then you want to look at the summary, and you want to see what information, what are my keywords, and what are the keywords in the paragraph, and how can I match them, right? So first summary kind of matches with our keywords on the left hand side in the box. You can see these are some of the keywords that we might have noted down, and we're going to look at summary, and we're going to see if these are present in the summary. So I'm going to read the summary here. There have been previous lectures in this series covering aspects of abnormal behavior. This lecture covers the modals of motivation. So we've got modals of motivation applied into normal people. We've got normal people there as well in our keyword that we noted down. Although there are numerous models of human motivation, two models will be described and compared. So you talk about two models, right? The homeostatic model and Maslow's model, with the main focus on the homeostatic model, and main focus was homeostatic model. So if you noted down all these keywords, it's going to help you to come up with that, to select that correct summary, okay? This is how you want to do it. Now let's talk about briefly scoring. It's judging your ability to comprehend and analyze and combine information from a recording and identify the most accurate summary, okay? It's either correct or incorrect. So if you're not sure about it, you will always need to guess. Must guess, because you don't want to lose point. You can still score if you don't know the answer, but I don't want you to leave it blank. Otherwise, you're going to lose point anyway. Okay? It affects your listening and reading scores, all right? So obviously you're reading the summary, so it gives you marks for reading as well. So it gives you listening and both reading. Okay, let's do the practice now for highlight incorrect summary. Listen to the summary very carefully. Do not read the options. Note down all the keywords. And then when you come back, you read the summaries and match with your keywords, and whatever the keywords you have noted down for your summary, you try to match it. And also you can use the elimination strategy, where you see redundant information, or you see wrong information, and you see the information that has not been mentioned in the lecture. You can eliminate those options. Okay, let's go.
So what influences consumers in different parts of the world? Many factors affect how we as individuals and societies live, buy, and consume. And it should be readily apparent that culture has a profound impact on the way consumers perceive themselves, the products they buy and consume, and the processes by which those products should be purchased, and the organizations that sell those products.
Okay, cool. So pause the video here, read all the options, select the correct one. You might have noted down the keywords, match your keywords with the options, and eliminate the wrong ones and eliminate the ones that are not been presented to you. And then when you come back, we're going to look at the transcript and we're going to look at the correct answer. All right, let's look at, I hope you had a chance to look at the options now. So let's look at the transcript. So what influences consumers in different parts of the world? Many factors affect how we as individuals and societies live, buy, and consume. And it should be readily apparent that culture has a profound impact on the way consumers perceive themselves, the products they buy and consume, and the processes by which those products should be purchased, and the organization that sells those products. Number one, culture throughout. So what are we talking about here? I mean, it talks about what influences consumers in different parts of the world. Many factors affect how we as individuals and societies live and buy and consume. Okay, many factors. So, and it should be readily apparent that culture has a profound impact. So culture has an impact on our consumers, on the way consumers perceive themselves and the products they buy and consume. The culture is a very important one, and the processes by which these products should be purchased and the organization that sells those products. So we talked about three important bits. We got culture that impacts our perception about ourselves and the products that we buy. And also the processes that by which the products should be purchased and the organization that sells, right? These are the three main things that we are looking for. The first one, culture throughout the world plays a mutually beneficial role in the consumer's market. Culture throughout the world plays a mutually beneficial role in the consumer market of the society. Through culture, consumers are able to identify the products most important to them, and at the same time, culture is able to adapt to what buyers and sellers desire at any given point. Now, the reason why it's incorrect is this response is incorrect because the speaker indicates that culture affects what products people buy. The speaker does not state or imply that organizations that sell products have an effect on culture. So it's not saying that's incorrect information. You should be able to highlight that, and that is wrong. Now let's look at option number two. Throughout many cultures found in the world, consumers have behaved predictably. While each society may have different values, the level of consumption as compared to other cultures is relatively equal. Globalization ensures that consumers adopt the same process when buying goods and services. There's no mention of globalization here, is it? So that information is not even mentioned, right? So let's read the explanation. The response is incorrect because the speaker directly contradicts this summary, as she says the culture affects the processes by which consumers purchase products, implying that culture informs values and thereby influences purchases. There is no discussion of predictability of consumer behavior or the level of consumption. Okay, so that's the reason why that is wrong. Let's read number three. So in here, the way a consumer buys, uses, and values a product is independent of cultural influence. And it is not independent. We know that it's independent. So that information is wrong straight away, but we can keep reading. A consumer may purchase desired products and still practice beliefs and customs of their culture. Even the organization responsible for bringing various products to consumer operate without regard to cultural sensitivity. That information is not mentioned. So the response is incorrect because the speaker indicates the culture has a profound impact, right? And here it's contradictory, isn't it? On which products consumers buy and use, how they buy them, and which organization they buy from, right? So that can't be correct. Now let's read the last one. Consumers, and if you just eliminated these three, it was easy for you to choose the fourth one, but you will have to read the last one to be able to be sure that you're you choosing the correct one. Now, consumers in different cultures value different things. These values, consumers in different cultures value different things. So it's making culture a relationship between culture, right? That's what's been given to us, right? These values, which can be unique from one culture to the next, impact not only what kinds of products these consumers buy, but also who they buy from. Who they buy from is what organization you buy from, right? How they buy is talking about the processes and what uses and reasons, right? So it's all talking about all of that, and that has been mentioned. So let's read the explanation here. This response is correct. The speaker says culture has a profound impact on the products they buy and consume, which implies that culture influences consumer decisions, leading people from one culture to make different purchases from those in another culture. According to speaker, culture also affects the processes by which these products should be purchased and the organization that sells those products, which addresses how they buy them, which is processes, and who they buy from, organization. So that is how you should be able to. And we talked about synonyms as well. A lot of synonyms is used in the summary here. We use some synonyms in summary ourselves when we write summary in Write from Spoken Text. And when you read the summary, you should be able to link your ideas with this. All right, now we're going to do another activity. This time I'm going to read the transcription to you. You're going to hear the transcription. I want you to not look at the screen, just heads down, note down the key information that you listen, and note down the topic, and then you're going to be reading all these options, and you're going to select the correct summary, okay? So let's start. We are not running out of oil. The first thing that one can say with absolute confidence is that we are not about to run out of oil. We are definitely not. But what we are approaching is the end of the first half, and this is one way to describe it. And in this chapter in history, lasted about 150 years since the first oil was produced. And we are coming to the end of that. And you have to find oil before you can produce it. And when we look back into history, we can find that the peak of discovery was in 1964, and that the discovery of oil has been falling ever since, relentlessly. And it's been falling despite of the worldwide search, always aimed at the biggest and best prospects. No one's looking for the smallest and the worst, the biggest and the best. It's been falling despite amazing technological and geological advances. We understand this business so much more than we did. And finally, it's been falling despite a very happy economic environment whereby most of the cost of exploration is written off against text. So I would say, in the view of all of those incentives and all of those benefits, if discovery has actually been falling relentlessly, there is no good reason to think that this trend is going to change direction. So in other words, we have passed the peak. All right, I want you to pause the video here. Whatever you heard, whatever key ideas that you noted down, jotted down, look at those ideas, look at the main topic, and read these 4 summaries. And when you come back, we're going to look at the transcription and we're going to look at the options. All right, I'm going to read the transcription to you just in case, so that you can see what information was presented to you when I was speaking. Let's read the transcript. We are not running out of oil. The first thing that one can say with absolute confidence is that we're not about to run out of oil. We are definitely not. But we are approaching in the end of the first half, and this is one way to describe it. And this chapter in history lasted about 150 years since the first oil was produced, and we are coming to the end of that. And you have to find oil before you can produce it. And when we look back into history, we can find that the peak of discovery was in 1964, and the discovery of oil has been falling ever since. Relentlessly, it's been falling despite the worldwide search, always aimed at the biggest and the best prospects. No one's looking for smallest and the worst, the biggest and the best. It's been falling despite amazing technological and geological advances. We understand this business so much more than we did. And finally, it's been falling despite a happy economic environment, whereby most of the cost of exploration is written off against text. So I would say, in my view, of all of those incentives and all of those benefits, if discovery has actually been falling relentlessly, there is no reason to think that this trend is going to change direction. So in other words, we have passed the peak. The first option that you have here is, unless major oil consumers invest in exploration now, which would be the first time major funds have been invested in 1964, global oil production will level out and be unable to meet increased demands for India and China. There is nothing mentioned about India and China. That's going to be easy for us to neglect that because that information has not been presented to us. This response is incorrect. The speaker says the peak of oil discovered was in 1964, and the discovery of oil has been falling despite the worldwide search and all of the advances in tax incentives. The speaker does not mention either India or China and says nothing about increased demand. Number two, with the continuation of improvements in technology, geology, and with government support, there is little doubt that further major reserves of oil will be found in the near future. This should result in sustainable oil supplies for a further 150 years. This information has not been mentioned, and it's going to be an incorrect response for you as well. This response is incorrect. The speaker says oil discovery has been falling, and it doesn't say that it's going to be sustainable. Despite amazing technological and geological advances, that's what it says. And there is no good reason to think that this trend is going to change direction. Okay, that is the summary that has been given to us. Number three, while we are not about to run out of oil, we are certainly past the peak of oil production, which occurred about 40 years ago. This is despite improvements in technology, geology, and with tax-subsidized investment in exploration. This response is correct. The speaker asserts we are not running out of oil. At the beginning of the recording, the speaker then says the big peak of oil discovery was in 1964, and the rate of oil discovery has been falling ever since, despite amazing technological and geological advances. He also mentions that most of the cost of exploration is written off against text. So that is the correct summary. You can easily spot that. Let's read the last one to make sure that we've got the right one. Oil consumption reached its peak in 1964. Since that time, the world has become increasingly dependent on oil. Doesn't mention that. It is unlikely that there will be any new major oil discoveries in the immediate future or at any subsequent time. This response is incorrect because the speaker does not discuss the world's dependence on oil. So you can eliminate that very easily as well. Let's just recap the things that we talked about. We talked about quite a lot in this lecture. Summarize written text. What is most important thing? Obviously, you want to listen. When you're listening, you don't want to be reading anything. The first thing you want to listen is you want to listen the topic. You should know what the topic is, and you should note down all the key supporting points. And when you write your summary, you want to write your summary starting with this topic sentence and then write the supporting points in a cohesive manner. Write between 50 to 70 words and always edit your word. Always spell check, always check your pronunciation, your grammar, punctuation, and your content. When we talked about highlight incorrect summary or highlight correct summary, You want to listen when you're listening. You don't want to read any options because there's a lot to read. And even if there's nothing to read, you don't want to be reading while you're listening. When you're listening, note down all the keywords and match your keywords with your highlight correct summary options and select the correct one.